They saw you sinking and still they stood there, motionless, expressionless, as if the water wasn't rising, as if your gasping didn't matter. But let's be clear, it wasn't that they couldn't save you. It was that they wouldn't, because your drowning served a purpose. It gave them comfort. It gave them power. You struggling meant they didn't have to face the greatness in you that once made them feel small. In that moment, their silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. They watched you drown not because they lacked love, but because they feared who you'd become if you survived. And they were right to fear it, because you're not coming back the same. You're coming back unshakable. They needed you helpless to feel powerful. They didn't offer a hand because your drowning fed something inside them. Something quiet, cold, and hidden. It's a truth too cruel for most to admit. Some people need others to fall just to feel tall. And you were light. You were rising too fast, glowing too much, questioning too deeply. That intimidated them. You were the storm they couldn't predict. And instead of learning to weather it with you, they prayed for the waves to pull you under. Your pain wasn't just an accident to them, it became their refuge. Watching you struggle made them feel secure in their own limitations. It justified their mediocrity. It made their fear look wise. Every time you cried out, they told themselves, see, they're not so strong after all. But you weren't weak. You were growing. You were breaking so you could rebuild, learning to breathe in waters others drown in. And that terrified them, because your helplessness gave them something. They didn't earn a sense of power. Not real power, not earned strength, just the illusion of it. And illusions are seductive, so they stayed still, comfortably distant, while you reached for air. Your shaking hands made them feel steady. Your broken voice made their silence seem wise. Your questions made their cowardice look like clarity. And all the while, they smiled in shadows, convincing themselves that their stillness was justified, that not helping you was a form of strength. But here's the truth, they'll never admit your fall was never about you. It was about their need to feel superior without ever evolving. And when you finally rise, not if, but when they'll feel it. Because now the illusion is gone. Now the one they watched drown has learned to walk on water. Now the silence that once echoed with judgment will be shattered by your strength. They needed you helpless, yes, but they never imagined you'd survive despite them. That you'd build muscle from drowning, that your scars would become armor, that the person they tried to reduce to nothing would become the very proof that they were never more than bystanders. So remember that. The next time you think you needed their help, remember, they needed your struggle, and still you made it out. You didn't just survive the water, you rewrote the current, and now, whether they clap or stay silent, the truth is unshakable. You were powerful even when they needed you to forget it. Your strength was a threat in disguise they didn't step in to save you, not because they were blind to your pain, but because they were never blind to your strength. That's the part they'll never say aloud. Because it wasn't your weakness that unsettled them, it was your potential. Even in your lowest, you carried something they couldn't understand. A quiet resilience, a silent flame. You were breaking, yes, but not disappearing. You were drowning, yes, but not defeated, and they could feel it, that you weren't truly finished, that deep beneath the surface you were still gathering force that terrified them. Because people don't fear broken things. They fear what broken things can become once they heal. You were never just a victim, you were a threat in disguise. Every tear you shed reminded them that you still felt, that your heart hadn't gone numb, that your spirit wasn't dead. You still had something left inside you, and that unsettled them, because your return would expose them. Your rise would unmask their comfort zones, their excuses, their unwillingness to evolve. You were what they never dared to become, someone who fights while falling. They watched you closely, pretending to be indifferent, pretending to be confused by your silence. But deep down, they knew what was coming. They knew a rebirth was building. You see, some people only feel safe when others are silent. Some only feel tall when others shrink. And you were born to rise. That's what made them freeze. Helping you would have meant standing beside someone who could eventually surpass them, someone who would shine brighter, speak louder, love deeper, and see clearer. So they stayed quiet, not out of hate but out of fear. You didn't lose their support. They lost the courage to be near your awakening. That's the part no one tells you, that sometimes the reason they walked away wasn't your darkness, but the light they knew was coming. They didn't want to witness your evolution. They didn't want to be in the same room when you stood up again, because your comeback would challenge their comfort. Your strength would question their stillness. And that's why they let you drown. Because the more you fought to breathe, the more they saw a version of you they could never compete with. And now that you've survived, don't look for apologies. Don't beg for answers. The silence was the answer. They feared what you were becoming, and they were right to. Because now you're not just strong, you're awake. And when a strong soul awakens, the world changes. Not because of who walked away, but because of who refused to stay down. They were never who you thought they were. It wasn't the silence that broke you, it was the realization behind it. That they weren't frozen, they weren't unaware, they weren't helpless, they simply chose not to move. And that truth cuts deeper than any betrayal ever could, because up until that moment, you believed in them, you trusted their presence, you counted their closeness as loyalty, their laughter as connection, their words as promises. But pain has a brutal way of pulling masks off people. And when the waters started rising, and your voice trembled just enough to need them, they did nothing. That was the unveiling. That was the moment you saw it. They were never who you thought they were. They were just close enough to witness your storm, but never deep enough to stand in it with you. They knew how to clap when you were smiling, but not how to hold you when you were shattering. And it wasn't because they didn't know how, it's because they never intended to. They were never meant to be your anchor. They were spectators in your story, pretending to be soldiers, and when the battle truly came, they vanished. Some didn't even leave, they just became invisible in place. Eyes averted, hearts closed. They watched the light fade from your eyes without blinking. That's when you finally understood. Their presence was proximity, not partnership. Their words were decoration, not devotion. And you were loyal to the idea of them, not the reality. You had created a version of them in your mind, stitched together with hope, loyalty, and love. But pain pulled the thread, and when it unraveled, you saw the truth. They were never built to carry you. Not in silence, not in fire, not when it mattered most. And it's okay now, because even though it hurt, you were given a gift. You saw clearly. You learned who never had a seat in your future, who was just passing through, playing roles in a script you thought was real. And as painful as that truth is, it's freeing, because now you don't wonder anymore. You don't chase ghosts in living bodies. You don't beg for warmth from cold hearts. The drowning showed you something life never could, the difference between those who love you and those who love the comfort of you. You needed to see it. You needed to know who disappears when your soul screams. Because from this point forward, you won't waste your breath calling out to people who made silence their answer. The ones who didn't move, let them stay still, let them fade, let them watch, because now your journey continues not surrounded by masks, but by mirrors. And you'll never mistake closeness for care again. They couldn't handle your comeback, they didn't help you. Not because you were too far gone, but because deep inside, they knew you weren't. And that's what terrified them. That's what made them stay quiet, what made them step back instead of forward. They could already see the ending before you even reached the surface, and it didn't include their control. It didn't include your silence. It didn't include your dependence, your comeback. It was the part of your story they weren't strong enough to witness, because they built their comfort on your collapse. They anchored their identity in your weakness. And the thought of you rising stronger, wiser, untouched by their absence shook something in them, because your comeback would be a mirror, and they weren't ready to see what it would reflect. It would expose their fear. It would expose their envy. It would show the world that while you were drowning, they were watching, and now that you're returning, not crawling, but walking, standing tall, breathing power, they're unsettled. Because your survival stripped their excuses bare. They can't say they didn't know, they can't say they tried. Your life itself becomes the evidence. You were supposed to fade. You were supposed to stay quiet, broken, dependent. That's how they pictured you. That's the version of you they felt safe around. But you didn't stay there. You didn't beg. You didn't vanish. You rebuilt, quietly, relentlessly. And now your presence feels different. Now your voice carries the weight of someone who's been through fire and didn't burn, only forged. That's the version they can't handle, because it makes their comfort look like cowardice. It makes their stillness look like betrayal. And it makes your strength undeniable. Understand this. Your rising makes some people uncomfortable, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something they couldn't. You healed without applause. You rebuilt without rescue, and you stood without permission. So when you return and they don't clap, don't be surprised when they look away. Don't feel insulted. That's not shame you're seeing, it's fear. Fear of what you've become, because they know now nothing they did or didn't do was enough to stop you. You're proof that light can come from silence, that survival isn't given, it's earned. And that kind of strength can't be controlled. That's why they couldn't handle your comeback. Not because it hurt them, but because it revealed them. So don't waste your energy looking for closure in their reactions. You already found closure in your rise. And now your story continues not in their shadow, but in your own light. You were meant to save yourself. They didn't come because they were never supposed to. That's the revelation that stings at first, but later sets you free. You kept reaching, kept hoping someone would hear the silence between your words, see the battle behind your eyes, and leap into the storm for you. But no one did, and you thought that meant you weren't worth saving. But the truth is far deeper. You were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to rise alone, unassisted, uncelebrated, because there are some versions of strength that only awaken when you have no choice but to fight with your last breath. When you've cried so long the tears turn into steel, when no hand reaches for you and so you build your own. This wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The kind of transformation that doesn't happen in comfort. You see, if they had lifted you up, you might have leaned on them forever. If they had carried you through it, you might have never discovered the power of your own legs. But now, look at you. You didn't just survive, you evolved. The person who once begged the sky for help is now walking through fire without flinching. Not because it's easy, but because now you know you can. That kind of self-rescue creates a different soul. One that doesn't chase validation. One that doesn't fear solitude. One that can't be manipulated by empty words or temporary hands. You stopped waiting. You started moving. And now your strength is no longer dependent on their presence. It was born in their absence. You understand now. The silence wasn't abandonment. It was direction. Life wasn't denying you support. It was handing you the tools to become unshakable. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely, but it's real. And real growth often starts in the dark, where no one claps and no one sees. But that's where you built yourself, in shadows, in silence. In the place where others walked away, you stayed. And that's why you no longer need them. Not in bitterness, but in truth. You needed to find out what you were made of. And they, by watching you drown without moving, unknowingly gave you that answer. You were made of fire, of resilience, of something eternal. So now, when you walk forward, it's not with anger. It's with peace. Because you're not carrying their absence anymore, you're carrying your own rebirth. You were meant to save yourself. And you did. That was always the plan.